live and online. It's Sleepless with Steve and the Movie Book Club with your host, Steve Pulaski.
Back and better than ever, Sleepless with Siskel, live on YouTube. Yep, this is Siskel in all his glory. Now he's pissed because he was comfortable. We come to you live and in living color every Wednesday evening, Sleepless with Steve, live on YouTube. Gang's back together again. Dominic Guanzon is back in the flesh. How are you, Dom? First things first.
Doing all right. The concert I went to, skipping out on last week's show, was pretty damn awesome. I saw Anna Monoguchi at the Vic in Chicago, Vic Theater. And it was kick-ass, dude. They played the soundtrack. Anna Monoguchi played the soundtrack to the Scott Pilgrim video game, specifically the soundtrack to the video game that they composed.
That's a great video game.
And they had the whole audio and visual thing going on. So while they were jamming out with the chiptune and all that stuff and the guitars, in the background, they had some, and it wasn't just like a 30-second, repeating MP4. It was like, hey, we're interweaving every single panel of the original graphic novel as the game goes along, and also like sprites and shit. And it was pretty damn good. Those guys mean business. And the opening acts were pretty decent as well. Hey, the second opening act, shout out to Equip. That's his DJ name, I believe. His artist, he's on Spotify. Dude dressed up in a black tank top, chainmail around his head, like chainmail, a guitar that was playing like anything but guitar sounds, and it was like, and he looked like he was ready to go like hardcore into like some hard drops, but it was actually like a step above Animal Crossing like sounds, and I don't mean that negatively. Like, I love that soundtrack, and it was like this beautiful dichotomy of like hardcore looks and like softcore like sounds, and it was really freaking hilarious.
That's interesting. That from your description right there, I think I would enjoy that. I think I would enjoy that experience.
I could probably not play it, but I'll send you guys the video afterwards, just a quick like 10-second thing. It was really funny. The
Scott Pilgrim video game though, man, like that, I remember when that came out, I played that my freshman year of high school. That thing's old. Yeah, that was a fun video game. Classic, like 16-bit style.
Yep.
Really fun. And I remember I read all the graphic novels because that came out the summer I was going into high school. I read all the graphic novels the first quarter of high school, and I played the video game. So I was really entrenched in Scott Pilgrim at that time. And that, like I said, that soundtrack was dope in that game. I can imagine live too.
It was just as good live as it was, because they really accentuated the guitars. It kind of fades in the background on the track, but when you're actually seeing it, and I'm pretty sure they accentuate it in the mix too, it is really damn good. Also, fun fact, real quick, the Brie Larson version of Black Sheep from the live action film, is now finally available to buy and stream as of last year. I actually found that out. Before, you could literally only find it on YouTube, like one YouTube video or like maybe two, and because it was not part of the original soundtrack. They released it last year.
Took them long enough.
Yeah, exactly. But that was such a good I think I'm quoting a YouTube comment, but it was like, whatever alternate universe where Brie Larson is a punk rocker chick full time is the universe I want to be in. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of agree with that.
Yeah, imagine if that song had released, like, initially, the different course of history that might have been taken. There's always those songs that like and I'm not talking like artists like Garth Brooks, who like is famously against like Apple Music and like Spotify. The Eagles were for a while too. Mm-hmm. Now they're on all that stuff. But like, I'm not talking about like specific artists or groups, but like there's certain songs that have fallen through the cracks. It's like movies that never came to DVD and were only on VHS. One song I know for sure I'm almost positive you still cannot find it on streaming platforms, and you can only find like low quality audio rips of it. Is that Nelly song from Longest Yard? Here Comes the Boom. You can't
Wait,
find.
like,
I don't think you can find that. I don't think you
how
can.
does it sing it real quick? I'm not putting you on the spot, but like, can you? I mean, I am, but it's like, boom,
here comes the boom. Y'all don't really want
not.
it like that. Made Siskel run. That song is pretty good. That's the end credits for Longest Yard. And like, if you hear a lot of the YouTube rips of it, you hear the background noise of like the football players clashing because it's ripped off either the trailer or the credits. Right. It's one of the best parts of that movie. That's a banger song because Nelly, that was one of, if not the first movies Nelly starred in.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I don't think you can find that on Spotify. I'm pretty sure you can't because I still have like a 28 kilobyte rip of it on my Android. But anyway, we'll move forward though. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today, at least 2 big things to talk about. I forced this movie down these guys' gullets, so I hope they don't hate me for it. Because I did not know this thing was coming out until the day it dropped, which is shocking for me because I'm a big Richard Linklater fan. And I promised these guys that we would link later and talk about Apollo 10.5. A Space Age Childhood. And there's a lot to talk about with this movie. This is Richard Linklater's third foray. I was trying to figure. I knew it was his third. I was trying to figure out the word to use here.
Oh, okay.
Third venture down the rotoscoped animation path. If you don't know what rotoscoped animation is, there's a reason you don't see it. It's a complicated ass process. And what it is it's basically you shoot scenes in live action and then you trace over them. This is very simplistic explanation, but you trace over them. That's what gives the images a very hyper realistic quality because you're tracing over live action images. It's a fascinating technique. Again, it's not employed very often, so I give Linklater a ton of credit for at least kind of not really reviving it, but at least making it a little bit more noteworthy because he did it in his first venture was Waking Life. Second was A Scanner Darkly. Now we have Apollo 10.5.
There's a really good quick Vox video on it where they explain what rotoscoping is and how like the old there's some old black and white cartoons where they did that exact technique for Cab Calloway's like film performances, live action performances. And then that's what they did for like a lot. Like there's a clown, famously like a clown who's doing Cab Calloway's moves, and it's so realistic and it looked, compared to other animation at the time, which was more all over the place. I say that lovingly, but rotoscoping. It's and how they do it in this movie. It took a while to grow. It eventually grew on me, but there's a reason why I think there's a reason why it's not chosen very often because it's complicated, as you said, and also it's not the prettiest aesthetic at first. You kind of have to get into it.
You do have to get used to it, and it also I think of all of his. And I haven't seen Waking Life, so I don't think I can make this claim with complete validity. But I think of all his rotoscope movies, because I did see A Scanner Darkly, I think this one's his most accessible in terms of it being like very germane to the story, where like A Scanner Darkly is like a very dark kind of thriller.
Yeah.
And Waking Life, I haven't seen it, but Waking Life is one of those kind of like interpretive, impressionistic style movies where it's almost dreamlike from what I've gauged. Again, I haven't seen it, but that's why I'm willing to make the claim that I think this is probably his most grounded rotoscope venture. And before we get into anything about the movie, because I already wrote a long ass review of this, I'm honestly more interested in what you guys have to say than myself. But I just want to say this too. I feel every time he releases a movie, I feel like I have to say this. I have to remind people that like Richard Linklater is one of the most, I would say, diverse American filmmakers in terms of content that he puts out and in terms of genres he's willing to experiment with. This is his first movie in 3 years. His last movie was honestly one of his weaker ones. And I've only really not cared for 2 of his movies, and I've seen almost all of them. His last movie was Where'd You Go, Bernadette? That was
yeah. I was like, dude, no, Everybody Wants Some was really good.
No, it's Where'd You Go, Bernadette? That was his last one. And then it was before that. It was Everybody Wants Some was 3 movies ago, because before that, Where'd You Go, Bernadette, there was Last Flag Flying.
That's right, yeah.
There was Last Flag Flying with Steve Carell, Lawrence Fishburne, and Bryan Cranston. And it's funny. It's like every couple of years, Richard Linklater makes a movie that like everybody talks about, like Boyhood, and then he makes like 3 or 4 other movies that are really good, and like they go really under the radar.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody wants. Some kind of got some traction, but then like I feel like nobody saw Last Flag Flying. Where'd You Go, Bernadette? I think was made money. I think it was okay. I think it did all right. And then this one went to Netflix, and you don't know sort of the response of how it fared, but this is a very, very interesting movie that is really the bulk of the movie is narrated by a very charmingly subdued Jack Black. He's the voice of a now adult man named Stan, who's kind of recalling life in Houston during the 1960s. This is the era of Walter Cronkite. This is the era of the Vietnam War. And this is also the era of the space race, too. And the movie is kind of fixed on 2 different things. It's like nostalgic callbacks to being a child of the 60s and sort of a carefree, danger is sort of imminent, but nobody really knew of it. Nobody really considered that sort of period in time in America. And then you have this imaginative sort of take where Stan, as a boy, is recruited in the middle of recess to be one of the kids to go to NASA, or to go to NASA and go to the moon, because of the fact that they built the pod too small and they can't, and it's like perfect for a child. So they recruit this random boy named Stan, these NASA agents on the playground, and he can't tell anybody, but he's going to space. That's sort of the imaginative daydream-like quality that's sort of the arc of this. But this movie, for all intents and purposes, is very conflict-free. There's no conflict really at all throughout this thing. And I took notes when I watched it, because the opening moments revolve around Stan as a boy getting recruited to NASA. And then it pivots to the adult Stan that's narrating sort of his childhood. And I wrote in there, like, I wrote in my notes, like 10, 15 minutes into like the nostalgic kind of retelling and recapping of Stan's childhood, leave it to Linklater to go on a 15-minute diversion of nostalgia in the middle of a movie about a kid going to space. And then I'm like, and then I think the next note I took was, damn, now it's 50 minutes on this tangent over here. It's the whole movie, But I before I get into any kind of thoughts, I'm going to throw it over to you, Dom. You weren't here last week. What say you about Apollo 10.5?
I watched CNN's Decades series, like the 20, or not 20s. They don't go that far back. The 60s, the 70s, the 2000s.
Those were pretty good. Those were pretty good. I did see those.
You could make an argument. This is being simplistic and kind of a disservice to Linklater's artistic merit here. But you could make an argument that this movie goes so far down that nostalgia route, where this is more of a narrative driven focus of like the 60s, of like a CNN documentary. And as disparaging as that may sound on surface level, to me, that's more like, hey, I kind of like those. And it's like, to have this like from a child, I mean, that's the perfect subtitle for this movie, right? A space age childhood. Like that really does put it in context, and having that kind of, not moral centering, emotional centering, it makes it that much more engrossing for me. It's a very, very light film. It's fun, and it's very nostalgic, even though the 3 of us were nowhere near born close to the 60s at all. This is, you could also say cynically, that this is the boomer movie. 100%. This is completely pandering to boomers. If, again, saying it kind of disparagingly, but man, no, it's real fun. And honestly, like, even though I cannot have any memories of those decades, of that decade, I can kind of relate to some of it, where it's like, yeah, there was a time where we didn't have cell phones, and we kind of played around outside and did really dumb stuff, and we were constantly getting hurt. Even as even me, as an awkward only child who spent an inordinate amount of time on his Xbox and PlayStation. Yeah, exactly. Then watching films, I'm sure for you, Steve. Even then, like, yeah, I was still doing stupid stuff outside with my schoolmates, getting hurt in the dumbest ways possible. The 3 of us being suburbanites, especially accentuating that. And so in that way, I think on some emotional level, if you give this movie a chance, there is a way for you to connect with it because it's just that light, that fun. And as I said earlier, the rotoscoping can feel a little off-putting. It has like uncanny valley, maybe a little too invoking that maybe too strong here, but it does have those elements where it's like, wow, I really got to get used to how like their cheekbones are animated, because it's like almost there but not quite. But honestly, the moral centering here of the space race and the moon landing, specifically the moon landing, was probably very smart, because the 60s were kind of a shit decade all around in many other aspects. And
I mean, he even talks
landing
about
on the moon.
I was gonna say
landing on the moon. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say he kind of brings that up, like where on TV they see all the riots and everything in the Vietnam War, and he's just like, I mean, yeah, I know, like now the era kind of sucked, but back then it was just confined to my TV. How was I supposed to know?
Exactly. And they even show that one clip from Questlove's documentary,
Summer of Soul.
Summer of Soul. They show that one clip of Summer of Soul where it's like, yeah, they're spending like hundreds of millions of dollars putting a dude on the moon when like we're literally out here dying in Harlem. And it's like, yeah, that's a good point. But like honestly, just like the moon landing is probably the one good thing the American government did that wasn't already a correction of the horrible things they did before, like the Civil Rights Act, and everything else about that decade was pretty damn crap. But having the dad play, not play, but having the dad be a working for NASA, it makes sense in that regard, and you kind of just excuse it. So if you're here looking for an ultra critique on white heterosexual suburban culture during this decade, while people of color and the LGBT community were being oppressed in other parts of the country, this movie ain't necessarily for you. But we are allowed to have movies where it's like, hey, can we just like look at what was going on culturally here beyond that? And you could easily make an argument for necessarily not arguing that, but hey, this movie knows exactly what it is. It knows what its lane is. And the framing around just a kid growing up with a NASA family, and being recruited to be the first person on the moon, it's such a ridiculous concept in the beginning that it knows what it's doing right away. So in that sense, it's a fun trip to the moon and back.
Joe, what say you?
The best way to put this movie is that it's Richard Linklater's photo album from the 60s. And he just enhanced it with coloring. And that might sound mean, and that might sound like a bad thing, but no, it won me over very quickly in this movie. I very much enjoy slice of life stuff when it's done very effectively, very creatively, stuff like that, and this is an example of it being done creatively. Because again, we don't get this animation style often. I mean, literally the only person I ever see really use it in film is Linklater. I'm sure there's other ones out there. I just haven't come across them yet, or I have maybe, and they're just not as memorable. This to me, like, I enjoyed watching this family throughout the entire 60s era, like, and all the stuff that they would bring up, music, movies, how like some people wore back then, like the difference between the two grandparents, where one of them was like, oh yeah, come over here, and like, I grew up during the Great Recession, or the Great Depression, I mean, and like, I save every nail I take out of a board and all this other stuff, and the other grandmother's like into conspiracy theories like every other Texan in Houston was at that time. It's just very charming. It feels like a real family. It feels like, you're just kind of you're really going through a photo album of somebody that's honestly lived in a very interesting time period in an interesting area as well. Because I mean, like, Houston was the heart of this whole space race stuff. That whenever they do cut back to the space race stuff, I thought that was gonna be distracting and kind of pull me out, and just for some reason it just kind of flowed naturally. I don't know if that's because, like, I just started taking it as this is the kid. This is like a kid just basically growing up during this time period. And this is his imagination, like, of, oh my God, like, this is probably what every kid dreamed of, was to be asked by NASA to go to the moon as a kid. Like, that's kind of maybe how I took it as. But, I mean, other than that, I mean, it's just a very charming, like, animated film. It's over in an hour and 36 minutes. And just the entire time I was sitting there, I just was having just a very good time, just laid back, mellow, learning some history, and watching a fun family just kind of interact with one another, whether it be the siblings or the dad and his, like, money-saving schemes that kept cracking me up throughout the whole movie, or, like, even just, like, the idea of, like, stop littering by, like, taking the beer pin off the can and putting in your beer and everything. And as Steve said, too, the movie's narrated by Jack Black. This is, like, one of the best things I've ever seen Jack Black do, like, in his career. Like, I loved him narrating in this, man. He has a perfect voice for a story like this.
I did not know that was him. I had to look it up later. I'm like, are you kidding me? That was Jack freaking Black. What?
Yeah, he narrates this thing very gorgeously. I also want to give credit to, because I feel like she's kind of unsung in this, as I mean, the family's so big, you know a little bit about some of them, or most of them, like a tiny bit. But the one I really liked of the whole family too is I think she's the eldest.
She's the eldest sister, yeah.
Vicky played voiced played by, I guess you could say, both Natalie Amaro. I like that because she's the type that, like, informs the younger siblings of, like, hidden meanings in songs. She decodes Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, what that song really means. And I really love the scene. And again, I'm like Dom, I'm an only child. I didn't grow up with siblings or anything. Joe, I forget, you're an only child too, right?
I am. I only have a stepbrother.
Are you kidding me? This is an only child podcast?
Yeah. This is an only child podcast. Yeah, because I just thought, I'm like, Joe's an only child too. Man, that's because I know very few, like, only children, like, outside of you guys. I guess I should start texting you on Siblings Day. But I do that with one of my friends from college. Her and I always text each other Happy Siblings Day. But moreover, so I can't relate to this, but though I love the scene with Vicky when she sneaks into the living room while the brothers are watching Destination Moon on TV, and she turns the TV to Dick Cavett interviewing Janis Joplin, and Stan pulls the sneak attack of throwing a pillow at her and trying to run to change the knob on the TV. And that's how you kind of, like, talk about this movie. I've realized, because I've recommended it to friends and we've had similar conversations. You kind of talk about certain moments. Like, this is one of those movies where it's like you talk about, like, certain scenes. Like, I love, what I love, one of the things I loved about this movie too. And Dom, I wonder if you guys are familiar with the song. Dom, I have a feeling you might be. The song that they play in it, that Zager and Evans song in the year 2525, has a moment in this. Now, that, if you don't know that song, in the year 2525, it's a fascinating song. I even think, don't quote me, and not that anybody would know this except for us, I think it was even at Wonk. I think it was even at the playlist at WONC, back when we were on radio. I think it was. In the year 2525 was a song by the group Zager and Evans, and it was their only hit. They are actually one of the only groups in music history. I'm pretty sure that, if not the only, they're one of, like, two that their first song hit #1 and they never charted after that. They never had a song even chart after that. Zager and Evans, though, in the year 2525 is a creepy song. If you've ever listened to it, there's no real chorus. It just goes up by year in the thousands, like 25, 25, 35, 35, 45, 45. And it talks about this dystopian reality where it's like everything you think, do, and say is in the pill that you took today. And it goes on, and things get even darker. And the scariest part is this song was #1 at the time of the moon landing. And that's, like, one of those facts that you can't make up. But yeah, if you haven't listened to that Zager and Evans song, give that a listen. That's a creepy song. That's like one of those songs that, like, you sleep with the light on if you play it, like, after 9 o'clock at night. It's a great song. They had another song. Mr. Turnkey or something. These guys made, there's a wonder they didn't take off. They made like some really dark music. They had another song. I don't remember the name of it. I think it was Mr. Turnkey, but it was about a child molester who as punishment would nail his hands to the wall. I swear to God. I swear to God.
I see why they didn't take off, man. I mean, like with hits like that, like, you know, appealing to a wide audience, like, cause
they were like Steely Dan, who was trying to appeal to no one. You know, like even less than Steely Dan of like trying to go against the grain, but they were good. I think Zager runs a guitar shop now. But anyway, there's a bit on that. There's a bit on Jiffy Pop. I don't think you can make a movie and set in the 60s without focusing on Jiffy Pop. There's a whole little bit about Jell-O. The one thing that I did love too, and I'll throw it back over to you guys, the other bit I love is when he's going over, when Stan's talking about all the TV shows that were on at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And the screen goes up one after another with the rotoscope animated title cards of each show. And it keeps going. There's like 40 shows. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's when I was like, okay, this is like a CNN. This is like one of those CNN documentaries. At that point, where they're just like unashamedly going full force into that. And then they kind of do it again with the board games. He doesn't narrate each single board game, but they do the same shtick. And it's like, this is just Decade in Review, isn't it? And hey, you know what? It's fun. It's fun as hell because it's small little vignettes with a almost stereotypical American family, not quite nuclear family. There's 6 kids in the damn house, but it's
there's one that even has more family. I mean, more kids in the family.
Oh yeah, it dwarfs it by comparison. But that's exactly what it's small little vignettes of their lives, but with the thoroughfare, with the unifying story of the moon landing.
Yeah,
and how they get there, and or rather, like what it's like to have. To see that on TV, being so, you know, living in Houston at that time, and having that connective tissue it's so vital. It's a beautifully simple formula. Honestly, like, I know this is like Linklater's not exact childhood, but you know, he was born in 61 and raised in Houston, so it's like, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Certainly a better childhood than Kenneth Branagh had, but. You know, honestly, like if he did the same thing for like other decades, I would watch the shit out of that. Dude, yeah. Because like, hey, show me the fun parts of the 80s as opposed to all the horrible things that were going on then.
Mr. Linklater, tell us a story.
Kinda. That's what this is.
Welcome to the war on drugs, kids.
Yeah. Oh God!
I mean,
but,
that's
go ahead.
That's why, like, you know, I just kind of fell in love with this movie. It's just like, you know, it was just really cool to see this done with like, because, you know, most of the time, like if I get like a time period, like maybe not the 80s, if you were to do another one, but like whenever we do see like movies that take place during the 80s, how many times do we say like the movie gets lost with itself by being stuck in the 80s? Like, it's just like, oh, here's this reference to, you know, the lunchboxes that existed back then. Here's, you know, G.I. Joe. Here's this. Like, you know, choosing a different time period, but also, like, doing it in a different way. Like, I mean, just look how much more helpful it was to actually be like, oh, this is actually kind of interesting. Just because, like, the animation kept you going. The whole family dynamic kept you interested throughout the whole story. And then, of course, you have the parts where, like, it just randomly cuts to this kid at NASA camp, like, in, like, you know, all the machines that they built and everything. I mean, I would be so down if you want to do stuff for like the 70s, hell, the 80s, 90s, whatever it may be. I think it would be cool.
I don't think he's going to, though.
No, he won't, yeah.
No, I know what we're saying, but, like, you know, this is one of those movies, too, that, like, it, you know, he grew up during that period.
Yeah.
I think he was 10. If I'm not mistaken, when I looked up, I think Linklater himself was like 10 when
something like that, or 9 or something like that.
Something like that. He was a toddler, and when the moon landing happened, and I bet that it was based off a daydream he had, or a recurring daydream, or a fascination, or a story he wanted to do and such like that. But it says something too, because this thing could have been insufferable. I mean, this thing could have been insufferable and very niche and specific, but I think it's a testament to Linklater's power as just a writer and just a storyteller as well, who does get wrapped up in nostalgia. That, again, he's making guys like us who were not anywhere close to being a twinkle in our parents' eyes by the time our parents were kids when this happened. And him making us nostalgic for that time period, I think that's a massive achievement for him.
It moves fast and it doesn't try to be clever. That's the key, I think.
That's a good point.
Because if it was, I know we're still in the middle of the 80s and then bleeding into the 90s, nostalgia super trip where it's like, hey, the 80s. Joe, you touched on this earlier where it's like, hey, yeah, the cube thing. Yeah, where you got to solve the cube.
The Rubik's Cube.
The colors on each side. Yeah. And like, that's a whole joke. No. This is it's hard. It's wearing, it's hard on its sleeve where it's like, yeah, I remember being a kid, 10 years old. And, we go to the drive-in theater and we'd watch we'd all of these different screens and we'd watch, we look for couples making out in the cars and stuff like that. And
can I ask something about that?
One of the movies was 2001: A Space Odyssey. That was such a cool movie. And you're right. Richard Linklater tells a story. It really just feels like you're hanging out with Grandpa, and he's telling you what it was like. That's the charm of it. He's not trying to be clever. Not to say it's devoid of humor, but he's not trying to be yuck funny about it. It's just an honest, true. This is what I saw during that time.
He's also not trying to recontextualize like the flaws and put a magnifying glass on what everything was wrong. It's more of this is how it was. What were you going to say, Joe?
I was going to say, man, is this true? Like this could be still a thing today, but I've only been to drive-ins with like one screen. But like, was there actually like drive-ins that had multiple movies playing at once? Like, and you would just pick whatever like screen you would go to?
I'm sure because they were really popular back then.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, damn, that's way cooler than what we got now.
There were less movie theaters. At the time, so I would imagine. I've never even been to a drive-in. Truthfully, I'm not very knowledgeable on drive-ins.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that was probably a thing, especially when you had don't forget, a lot of America was far more farmland at the time.
And with me asking that question, I'll pass it off to you, Dom, because I know you want to say something. It's just like. It's moments like that while I'm watching this movie that made me pull out my phone and start Googling stuff. Because I was just like, dude, like, this is fun, dude. This is like some PBS Kids, like animation,
I did that too. There's a couple of those 60s shows that lasted like 4 episodes that I kind of want to go get obsessed with.
Like, it's just like, this is like what I love when they do stuff like this on CNN or something. Like, this is like, I absolutely loved like how this was done and executed. Go on, Dom.
If this was CNN Plus, it might have had a fighting chance.
It's just really funny. It's like the shortest lived streaming service of all time or something like that, even shorter than Quibi. Anyway, that aside, you're right. Thank you. That's actually a really important, in the context of the movie, an important scene of like how, that's how this is true and honest. Where it's like, there were those TV shows that literally lasted one season, and here's like, and you think he's not going to go into it. No, he goes into it for like a minute. And it's like, okay, that's when you know for sure this is a memory. This isn't just pulling it out of a hat where it's like, Wikipedia page, 1966, okay, Hawaii Five-0 or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes it so much better in this movie than like a typical movie being like, look, a Game Boy, like stuff like that.
Exactly.
It's just that like it actually feels like somebody's recalling it the way they're telling it. It's not just a visual and a name drop. It's like they're actually like telling you something from.
It's lived in.
It's lived in. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The paddling. The corporal punishment. I'm like, Jesus Christ, that really was. Oh, here's what I was gonna say. Where it's like, it's Joe, the multiple screens at the drive-ins. Yeah, this movie reminded me. Kids were bored as absolute hell back then, dude. And also our childhoods too in the 90s and early 2000s.
I always tell people this. Do you remember being bored when there was nothing to do?
Yeah.
Remember that?
I think we are the we're the last generation.
With COVID though, that I think we kind of had that again. But like,
a little bit.
I know what you mean with like us being the last generation to know what it's like to grow up without phones and internet and whatnot,
and be bored. And remember, be truly bored,
and there was nothing to do. Even for example, too, I've and this is so random. I got an oil change yesterday in my car, and I was in one of those waiting rooms or whatever for like an hour and a half or hour and 20, whatever it was, and it's like. I was using that time to read articles, but on my phone, but it wasn't lost to me that it was like, remember when all you had in those damn waiting rooms was whatever happened to be on TV, and then like Women's Health magazine.
Yeah.
That was pretty much it.
And then you had the little toy thing that you would just like move a block through like a string of like something, and you're like, well, that's done. I've already played.
I don't have my phone near me because I don't keep it near me during Sleepless, but it's like it's like the anti-boredom machine, you know. And this goes back to a time when it was like. I like chasing the truck that was spraying the mosquito spray was like a good idea and like something to do. I like when the kid passes out on the asphalt. That's funny. I like when
oh my god.
When the kid sleeps on the head, it's like a baby.
When they played Red Rover, I've actually seen that happen to a kid. Like the
really?
consequence of that?
Yeah.
It happened at my school's playground because it was the exact same scenario. We had the last kid to run through was really large and big, and like he trucked one of the kids and broke something in them.
Shout out to that Richard Linklater for dedicating to the rotoscopic technique. He actually broke a kid's arm. But that's another thing too, where it's like one of those dichotomies where it's like, yeah, dude, kids were getting hurt all the time growing up. At the same time, it's probably good that we don't do that anymore, kinda a little bit.
You always knew who had a good summer. You always know who had a good summer when on the first day of school back in middle school or high school, somebody come back with a cast. Yeah. You always knew who had like a banger summer. You know?
Where'd you go? I went to Action Park.
We'll come back, recap, give our final thoughts on Apollo 10.5, A Space Age Childhood. Then we got another story from Variety with the theater owners meeting. National Association of Theater Owners met over the weekend, and we will recap that. But we'll go into final thoughts on Apollo 10.5 right after this Zoom-sponsored intermission. Sleepless with Steve gang's back together, at least for this week. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Don't go anywhere. Back and better than ever, it's Sleepless with Steve, live on YouTube. We are recapping, reviewing, however you want to look at it, Apollo 10.5, A Space Age Childhood, the brand new Richard Linklater movie, now streaming on Netflix. The last point I'll make with this, because I don't have a ton in the way of criticisms here, and I'll maybe even parlay this into my final thoughts, keep things moving. But I was worried about an hour in, maybe even less, that I thought that Jack Black's narration was going to overtake any room for the characters themselves to kind of breathe and actually converse. Because that's probably the one frustrating element with the narration. It's not it's not a problem with Jack Black, but it's a lot of like telling, not showing. It shows. It definitely shows. But there's not a lot of like connection initially to these characters. But I will say the final 30 minutes is largely dialogue driven between the family. And they build up the liftoff of Apollo 11 and the subsequent moon landing pretty damn well. And that's a testament, I think, to like Richard Linklater being very cognizant of this material, because it's a personal essay sort of a movie. That's really what it winds up being. I think 90 minutes, I think it's 90 minutes without credits. 90 minutes is like the optimal length for something like this, where it's not a taxing sit. And I think a lot of what Linklater did made this so it was going to be as not only accessible, but as really poignant, as really, meaningful as it wanted to be. And that's why I wound up giving it 3.5 out of 4 stars, because I think this is just a really well-made personal essay type of a movie that we don't get a lot. It's very rare we get a movie without really tangible conflict, and it winds up being pretty damn delightful. So it's 3.5 out of 4 stars with me. I don't know if you, Dom, you could set the table here. If you've got any criticisms, you could parlay that in your final thoughts.
Yeah. My only criticism, I don't even know if it's a fair one. But honestly, how I reconcile, I kind of alluded to it earlier, where it's like, here in 2022, we're so focused on looking back on pretty much everything about American history. And it's like, yeah, everything's kind of shit back then. And it's like, we were just kind of clothing ourselves, putting the wool over our eyes willingly and fully of all this social evils and upheavals that we've been having, and it's all coming to a head now, 2020 in so many different ways. So it's like, in this landscape, is it like, can you, obviously you can always release a movie like this, but where does it sit in this day and age? And watching it, where it's like, yeah, I don't have any issue with this. This is fine. It is exactly what it is, and it's not putting down any of the other things that were going on. This is Richard Linklater's personal story. And yeah, it was like he grew up in the lily white suburbs of Houston area. They even say in the movie where it's like, yeah, there's only like 3 black kids in our school and like 6 people working at NASA that are of color. So it's like, that's an issue we'll face later. And, in a way, they're just telling you right now, it's like, hey, in another movie, like, and that's totally fine. So yeah, a super solid 3 out of 4 stars here. I had so much fun with this, movie, and it's we joke that he should do this with other decades. I don't really think so, because it'd be cheap of him probably to do that. But
it might run thin too, like he might be like,
yeah, 100%. And it's but let me tell you this. I want to see an experiment of showing actual boomers what they think about this movie that actually grew up during this time. And I want to know their ratings. If you're watching this, I don't know if I can do this with my parents because they grew up in the Philippines, so they're not going to know like 75% of the stuff that was going on during that time. But show it to your parents if able, and let us know what you think, because I really want to know what people think, what your parents think about this movie. Because it leans heavily on its generational references, of course, but at the same time, it doesn't hurt itself by doing so, because it did it in all the right ways, and that's why I do recommend it.
Joe, send us home on Apollo 10.5.
I'll be real quick with mine. I think it's just a very fun slice of life movie that takes you back to the 60s, and you get to examine so many cool things that existed back then and in the Houston area, like Astroworld. I've always I always keep hearing about this damn theme park, not the concert, and I'm always like, man, that actually would have been cool to go see. Man, and also, man, like, side note too, I miss theme park designs like that, where they had like crazy like carts that take you from one side to the other. That's a whole different story, but it's just like,
where they really tried unifying the whole damn aesthetic.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Like, I remember Six Flags used to have the train that would take you around the park, and then they just stopped doing that.
It was Great America.
An all-encompassing world, you know what I mean?
It was Great America.
Anyway, but
we need to make America. Oh, no,
we need to make Great America great again.
Make Great America great again.
Yeah, but Apollo 10.5, Space Age Childhood. I mean, it's a fun slice of life movie that Linklater adds a lot of personality to it with the help of Jack Black's narration and the rotoscope animation. It is a fun treat to watch. It's in and out before you know it. I highly recommend watching it. I'm with Steve on his rating. I'm also giving it 3.5 out of 4 stars.
I'm glad you guys dug this one. I think it's become kind of a low key favorite of mine this year.
Same. I wouldn't. I'm not even kidding here. I wouldn't be surprised if this shows up at my top 10.
Neither would I.
If we did the top 10 right now, or whatever right now, it would probably show up.
You know, it ain't no cha-cha real smooth in my opinion.
Oh,
this has to be the longest running tease right now with that movie.
You're gonna hype it up too much.
I know something you don't know now, and you don't know. You won't know until June 13th. But anyway,
I'm gonna finish watching that movie and just text you and be like, "That movie sucked."
Oh man, but we will move forward with this topic. Kind of want one of you guys to take this. I've been talking a lot. Kind of want one of you guys to take it. There was essentially the National Association of Theater Owners, NATO, National Association of Theater Owners had their sort of convention at CinemaCon, or had their little exhibition exhibit at CinemaCon. And they were talking about sort of the landscape of movie going. They do this every year, and now they can finally meet in person and talk about it and whatnot. And you had the head of the National Association of Theater Owners, John Fithian, spoke. Which one of you guys wants to kind of set the stage for this topic? Any takers over here?
I'm fine. Taking it. I can do it.
All right, Joseph. I just want a different voice than mine. I'm getting voice fatigue on my own.
You're fine. I just gotta get the screen all set up and everything.
You're good.
Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. So yeah, John Fithian, as Steve was like alluding to, he basically spoke out on Tuesday at CinemaCon, basically just announcing that the same day business model that we saw throughout a little bit in 2020, but a majority of 2021 is officially just dead. A model that we talked about extensively here on Sleepless with Steve at the start of the year of 2021. A model that we thought was the smart move to do when it came to the whole idea of, theaters are open, but, there is a virus out there. And what ultimately ended up happening was that you had people either not going to the theater to watch something, because, it's funny that this then came out around the same time HBO finally released like their numbers for all the movies that came out in 2021 and how much they were streamed overall and everything. And you look at how many households streamed The Suicide Squad compared to going to see it in theaters. You're like, well, there's your answer. That's why that movie didn't make any damn money. But basically, yeah, they basically announced that model is officially dead, and what killed it was piracy, because, it's existing on the internet. It's something that you can easily pirate and everything, as Dom smirks and squints his eyes suspiciously. But yeah, it basically goes into that, and talking about how, if a major title that people are clamoring to see is in theaters, to see in theaters is released too quickly to home and then pirated, the temptation to stay home and watch a pirated film becomes greater for many potential moviegoers. And, to give credit, that is true, but it's just depending on how good your movie is, I still feel like you can make money. That's either me or that could be debated on a whole other thing. He talks about how blockbusters are keystones of this industry, and we have a great slate of big movies, and that's why, essentially why they're not doing the same day model anymore. They really want to just rebuild box office revenue with the amount of blockbusters we have lined up this year. And if you go to, IMDb, you go to Coming Soon, and you look at the amount of actual big studio movies we're getting this year compared to last year, it makes sense. I mean, hell, we started with Batman in March. Back in March of 2021, we didn't have anything. It was just it was a barren wasteland. It took until May, where Quiet Place Part 2 was kind of the first big, all right, here we go, we're back in theaters now. But yeah, I'll leave it at that for right now. Dom, do you want to jump in, because I know you're probably chomping at the bit right now, wanting to say something to the CEO.
Oh boy.
No, hey, I'm not going to go too deep into it. Just that pirating and illegal streaming, all that stuff, that's always going to be the scapegoat for any major media corporation, no matter what. Literally anything, movies, TV, video games. I'm not going to say that people who torrent are the working class heroes of the person trying to of all people trying to consume art. Anyway, the list of movies that they show here in the Variety article is actually a little. I don't think, is it a comprehensive?
It doesn't go into, like, you don't see Dune on here. It doesn't go into the later
That's what I
releases,
thought.
like the end of the year that we got. Like, because there's no.
Oh no, I think. Okay, the second page is Dune.
Oh, it is?
Second page? Oh, wow. Look at that.
Oh, there is a second. Okay. Okay, because I was going to say, I was like, they're missing King Richard. They're missing Clifford. Okay, they're really not.
It actually feels shorter than I thought it'd be.
Dude,
this
right?
can't be comprehensive.
No, even when I looked at
the
even when I looked at that list, like, just the first page, I was just like, man, I felt like we had way more like at-home releases than we actually did.
Honestly, I think this is honestly comprehensive though, because you got to think these are movies that came out the day and date, same time in theaters as they did on streaming, and
didn't get delayed.
Didn't get delayed. HBO Max makes up the bulk of this. Now, I think this is accurate. I really do, because I'm struggling to think. They even got Marry Me on there, which is one even I forget that Marry Me did do the day and date thing. And Firestarter next month is going to be, I think, probably, unless Universal is going to keep that up, Firestarter is going to Peacock as well the same day it comes to theaters. But I also think it's more of a limited release.
Yeah,
so this is comprehensive.
This was never going to last. This was an emergency measure spurred on by a once in a lifetime event. But they're missing too much of their money.
It was
too much of their money.
We even said this when we talked about this at first. Either way, this is a great way to boost your streaming service numbers, and it did wonders for HBO Max. I mean, like, a lot of we saw like how many people viewed the Batman. Hell, Mortal Kombat, 4.5 million viewers. Like, Jesus.
That's too much. That's too much.
Like, we saw that, like, yeah, it boosted numbers greatly during a time where people were stuck at home and had nothing to watch. So, all power to them for, at least going through that, especially Warner Bros. At the end of the day, I'll say this. Warner Bros. Put a lot out there compared to every other studio. They really took a whole entire year's worth of movies that they could have just, like, kept waiting on and said, screw it. Like, we'll actually just put it out there.
And they did not, and give them credit, they did not pull the Slick Rick on any of these with, like, The Matrix. Like, because even, like, when The Matrix came out in December, the landscape was a little bit better. A lot of the boosters were available. People were, getting vaccinated in mass. By that point, a lot of people were already vaccinated and movie theaters were reopened. They could have easily reneged on that. But honestly, they did keep their promise that, like, all of these movies will come to HBO Max.
And as of now,
I give them credit for that, doing that, because, and we said this too, even talking about this, that piracy was going to be the thing that's going to screw this up. because if you know anything about like piracy, how it works, if you've done it, or like if you've like read about it and stuff, you know what happens when movies come to theaters. It takes a while before there's like a clean rip of the movie online. A lot of it is still the camcorder crap. That is still an actual thing. But when a movie comes to a streaming service, you can, I don't care what kind of protection they have. It's a video online. It's able to be copied. You get a 1080p rip of that movie the second it drops. The movie drops at midnight in your local area. An hour later, it's probably on the piracy sites in full quality, in full streaming quality. When a movie goes to theaters, it's a lot harder to get a clean quality rip of it.
Yeah, I mean, even then, like, even now, I should say, they're sticking to their promise about the whole 45-day window thing, just like Paramount's doing as well. Like, Paramount just announced that Sonic 2 will be coming to, Paramount Plus on May, like, 21st. And Warner Bros. Is doing the exact same thing. Like, they just added the Batman onto HBO Max. And they're going to do the same with the rest of their catalog they have lined up this year, where it's like, after 45 days, we'll put it on here. Because, they're at least, like, I think that's, like, a better way of doing it now, as we're, like, people are getting boosters and, hopefully levels stay down and everything. It's just like, hey, it's out in theaters right now. You can go see it. But, if you're still a little bit, like, hesitant, stick with our subscription. It'll be on here before you know it.
I keep going back to this. Every time we bring up the day and date release, I always go back to, like, now kind of forgotten, not by us, but the forgotten stories of like movies that tested this like 10 years ago, or, you know, whatever it was, 8 years ago, 7 years ago. Like, I mean, there's obviously the famous, we've brought it up on this show. I swear to God, it's more than once keeping it alive. The story of Tower Heist. And that what they tried to do with that thing of all movies. It's funny. It's always the least suspecting movie. And then you had Paranormal Activity, the Ghost Dimension, and Trolls, obviously for the COVID era, and then you had Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse as well, that pissed AMC off so bad they didn't even show either that or Paranormal Activity, the Ghost Dimension. You know, that's why when you go back and you look at like if you're a big nerd and you're on Wikipedia and you look at like the box office gross of the Paranormal Activity movies, there's a huge dip with the Ghost Dimension, and you're like, man, this thing didn't do well. And then you remember it's like, oh yeah, AMC like planted their foot and said they weren't going to carry that nor Scout's Guide when they were going to do that. Like when it waned down in theater count, they were going to put it on streaming, you know, to rent. You know, the experimental ways the studios tried to go about this. And then like most change is ultimately happens when people are forced into it, you know, by a cataclysmic circumstance, even though nobody could have foresaw a worldwide pandemic.
Forced evolution. And we are now seeing, not just in movies and even media, we're seeing it everywhere, where it's like the pandemic really forced us, and for a while, for a few harrowing months, conditioned us one way into a new landscape. We got a real taste of that stuff, or, you know, of whatever that was, whether it was the workplace, God, I can't imagine. There's going to be literal volumes of dissertations about how the pandemic affected children and how it affected their school life. I can't imagine being a kid during this time, even now. But in the world of movies in particular, we're now seeing kind of the reaction, or you know, the kind of the slide backwards. Maybe that's putting it one way or the other. Maybe a charged word there, but you know what I mean. It's coming back to the way things were. The real question now, this particular story was always going to be an inevitability. The question is, by how much will anything stay behind? What will the consumer market crave through their dollar? That's also happening with stuff like streaming services. Netflix is the poster child for this, of like, yeah, let's just keep shooting ourselves in the foot. Let's see how much infinite growth we can sustain by doing worse things for ourselves. So it's all coming to a head. This is honestly, this is like the heart of our show. This is like,
it is.
It's the ongoing story. If anything, if Sleepless with Steve, the revival, means anything else to anyone at any point in time, it's this ongoing thing, and we will diligently once a week cover this story.
No, I love keeping my finger on the pulse of streaming just because it's so fluid. You know, I don't want to say we're out of it now, but I think we kind of are. We're out of the era of this. Let me be specific.
Right.
We're out of the era of new services popping up at random. At least I think we're exiting that, because all the major players seem to have their streaming services. Universal has Peacock. Warner has HBO Max. Paramount's got Paramount Plus. Obviously, there's Netflix and Hulu and other stuff. But now now I think we've got our players here, and now it's going to be a battle of like, who's going to survive? Who's going to eat the other one? You know what I mean? Like, how are they going to cannibalize each other? And now the Netflix saga, Joe and I touched on it last week. The Netflix saga is heating up right now too, because the almighty empire right now is really going through turbulent times now.
Yeah.
And the stuff that they're canceling and the stuff that they've been canceling, a lot of animated projects, which I just want to end with this too. We'll seg out of this. It was a good time talking about it. Man, it pisses me off when I woke up a couple mornings ago and Bone got canceled again.
Oh, yeah.
That sucks. Has any creator ever had worse luck than Jeff Smith trying to get his graphic novel series that meant so much to like people our age growing up? That was the gateway graphic novel. It was for me. That was the gateway graphic novel for many of us, and that thing still hasn't been adapted. It's got turned down by Disney, Nickelodeon, and now Netflix. You know, that's asinine to me. But I don't want to get too pissed off today, or else we would have had to touch on that. But Great show. Great stuff. Next week, we're tackling the Northman. Again, sans Dominic. Dominic's got better things to do than hang out with us.
No, I don't. No, this is a work-related thing.
Oh, you're gone
No,
next week too?
No, I didn't tell you. I told you I told Steve before you joined the green room.
Oh, damn.
Dude, he's missing the film hipster renaissance.
I
I
am.
know, yeah. The
I
hell,
know.
dude? We
I'm
gotta
happy
revoke your
about
credit
it.
card until you see these films.
I was late on Everything Everywhere against my own volition. But no, we're going to tackle the Northman next week. So I'm looking forward to that. Then the following week's Doctor Strange 2. So we are going to.
Oh, we are reviewing that.
We are going to review
Okay.
that. Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah, because I looked, there's really nothing. May is very barren.
It really is.
It
I
is.
like
It
that
is.
shade. I like that shade where it's like, yeah, there's nearly nothing. We'll review Doctor Strange.
Well, there isn't anything. Like I was like trying, I've gotten kind of fatigued in my own self again with Marvel movies, but there really isn't anything, and I'm not really sure that I'm like 70% sure Firestarter is going to be coming out near me. Because I do want to see that. So I don't want to marry myself to Firestarter yet. Marry us to Firestarter and have an Everything Everywhere situation like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So that's
And
why
who's to say the same thing won't happen to men?
yeah, that's the thing. I mean, because I'm worried about this anti-A24 bias over here. now that Joe had me, or Joe, I'm not gonna say peer pressured. I'm playing over here, but now that I'm a AAA 24 member, I'm gonna wear my pin to the theater and be like, "You see what this is, Jagoff? And you don't have men in the opening weekend,
How dare you?
That's what it should be. Let me get a private screening. What do you want to see? Men by myself." But that's our show today. That's our show. Sleepless with Steve, live on YouTube. Highlights will be posted on the YouTube channel, which you're watching right now, and over on my website. Check it out. Dearly appreciate it. StevePulaski.com. For Dominic Guanzon, Joe Viso, and yours truly, this has yet again been Sleepless with Steve. Good stuff. Good stuff, gentlemen. Yeah, I forgot you weren't on the call when Dom said he was going to be out next week.
I have work, and it's an event. It's an evening event.
Dude, it's all
JP
good.
Morgan.
Let me know on Monday. Let me know by Monday if you can. Let me know by Monday. Oh, wow. Dude, I'm always willing. You know me, I'm always willing to make accommodations, especially when mom's involved. So you know me on that. No, absolutely, that's not a problem at all. Well, and hell, hey, you know what? Too, I just realized that's you have extra obligation to be good. It's Mother's Day next weekend. You have extra obligation to be good. That's good. That's good. Last thing, man, and this has nothing to do with anything we were talking